We're in the Shulchan Aruch, Orach Chayim, chapter 168. If anybody can find that Sefaria link and post it in the chat box, I would be very grateful to you. We are wrapping up this chapter. This is the last chapter in the book that we have in front of us. And I would love to have a meeting with the Kollel about which volume of Shulchan Aruch you want to study next. After we're done this, it's only a matter of days, maybe 2 weeks. Thank you to Pam. I appreciate that. Maran writes, Yud Gimel, halacha Yud Gimel. We're now discussing which breads, which foods require the Hamotzi blessing on them and which are just a Mezonot. I mean, what really sets apart a cake from bread? What sets apart a pancake from a tortilla? You know, what's the difference between these things? And we're going to discuss those now. 467, Maran writes, Afilu davar sheblilato ava. Even a dough whose consistency, that's how I'm going to translate the word. I'm not sure that's the best way to translate it, but it's what I think is right, is thick. Meaning, you have two types of dough. Let's say you have dough that's dough, like a challah dough, like a bread dough, pita dough. You then have bread that's a batter of sorts. Yeah, so can imagine pancake batter. Yeah, we can accept. So that's called blilato racha. It's like a soft, it's a liquidy kind of batter. Maybe even a sphinge. You know the Moroccan donuts we make after Pesach is over, at the Mimuna party. No, I'm confusing it now. Sphinge is what we make in Chanukah. Mimuna party, we have the mufleta. Some of those doughs are pretty watery. They're pretty light. So now we're talking about a dough that's, for all intents and purposes, the consistency of bread dough. And it has no extra sugar or sprinkles and chocolate chips. It's dough. It's flour, water, yeast, whatever you'd put in there. Im bishla o tigna. If you take this dough and you cook it or you fry it. What's the difference? What's cooking and frying as opposed to what? What would be the other way you make this dough? Baking it. So if you want to bake bread, you take bread and you take dough and you put it in the oven. Here what you're doing is you're taking dough and you're deep frying it. So imagine a donut. Can you imagine that? Or something you're cooking but not baking. Cooking how? Give me an example of a dough that you might cook.
In water or in oil?
Very good. In water. So let's say in water. What would you be making in water? Give me an example of dough you'd prepare in water.
Dumpling.
Very good. Dumplings. Ashkenazi Jews eat kreplach. Maybe a matzah ball if it was made with certain ingredients. That type of thing. Bagels, in certain places, they boil the bagels and then they bake them. Or they bake them, they boil them. I don't know which direction that goes. But that's an idea. You take a dough and you're cooking it, you're not baking it. So either you're cooking or frying dough. En mevarech aleha hamotzi. You do not recite the hamotzi on this dough. Afilu sheyesh aleha torita denahama. Even though it looks like bread, meaning it has the appearance, the resemblance of bread. Vafilu nitchayva bechala. Even if it's obligated to have chala removed from that dough, meaning it's so much dough that you would take chala from it. Devirkat hamotzi eno holech ela achar shat afia. The blessing of hamotzi is dictated not by the consistency of the dough, but rather it's dictated by the way in which you bake it. That's the opinion of Rabbeinu Yonah, Rabbeinu Yerucham, the name of Rabbi Shimshon, and the Rambam. So Maran is telling you, halacha. Halacha, you take dough and you fry it or you cook it in liquid. This dough is not hamotzi. What if it looks like bread? It doesn't make a difference. It's still not bread. Why? Because what makes something into bread is the way you cook it and not the way that you knead it. It's not the dough. It's the actual final product. V'yesh cholkin, and there are those who argue This is Rabbeinu Tam. But what's the halacha? Where did Rabbi Yosef go? I think he left. When you have Maran write one halacha, bistam, Maran says halacha is like this. And then he says, v'yesh cholkin. And some argue, or some say, some add, some whatever he's going to write. Which one is Maran's opinion? The first or the second?
The first one.
The first one, very good. But what if Maran writes, yesh omrim, v'yesh omrim? Some say and some say. Which one is his opinion? The second one. The second one. Okay, but if Maran says a halacha plain and then he adds an opinion, his stance is always the first one. But if there are some say and some say, his opinion is the second one. So here it's a case of he says a halacha and then he says and some argue. V'omrim, and they say, Dechol shetchilat ha'isa ava. So long as the beginning of the dough is thick, afilu rikecha achar kach b'mayim v'asa sufganin. Even though you've now softened it in water and you've made it into sufganin. Sufganin, interesting. They claim that the root of sufganin is sfog, like a sponge, meaning now the dough becomes spongy. In Hebrew, we would probably say sufganin are the closest thing, donuts. Imagine donuts. The dough of a donut. Don't think of the sprinkles and just the dough, that consistency. Uvishla b'mayim o tigna b'shemen. If you cook it in water, fry it in oil, mevarech aleha hamotzi, you recite the hamotzi on that food. The Rama writes, v'nahagu lehaker, the custom is to be lenient. Now back to Maran. Yirat Shamayim, Maran says, and a God-fearing individual, yetzei yedei shenehem, will fulfill both of these opinions. V'lo yochal ela al yedei shivarech alechem acher techila. Maran says the God-fearing individual will choose not to stick their head into this problem, and instead they will choose only to eat this in a meal in which they already washed on regular bread, and now they could bring this out. It's already included in the blessing of that meal. Maran says, avoid the problem. So here it's very interesting. Maran is doing something which we can discuss at a different place, why Maran is being so particular about this extra opinion. But Maran's halacha is, if you take dough and you fry it, or you boil it, then that dough, even if it looks like bread, what is its blessing? Is it Hamotzi? No, the blessing is Mezonot. But he says, there are those who argue that if you take bread, and if you take dough, which is thick like bread's dough, and you boil it or you fry it in water or oil, then you recite Hamotzi. What does Maran say you should do? Try to avoid this issue, and only eat these type of foods in the middle of a meal which you already began with regular bread. It's a rare occurrence for Maran to avoid telling us exactly what is the halacha, but I think it's obvious to everybody. The halacha is the first opinion, but he sees the second opinion compelling enough that you should take into consideration. If you are a Yirat Shamayim, one has to think, what is the category of a Yirat Shamayim? I would like to believe that all people here are God-fearing people. But it's a certain halacha category. Maybe not, it's an extra halacha category. Of a person who is so particular, you're so particular in halacha, you ran out of halachot that you don't keep already. You already finished all the halachot, now you're just waiting around for some extras, right? You're that type of individual. You can imagine? That's the kind. When they say that a Yirat Shamayim should wear 2 pairs of tefillin, one Rashi, one Rabbeinu Tam. Yeah, because you ran out of mitzvot to do. You don't speak Lashon Hara, you're honest, you never lie, you're always a nice person, you respect your parents, you keep Shabbat perfectly, you eat kasher, you do everything. You learn Torah all day, all the things that apply, whatever mitzvot you do. You're perfect. So now you ran out of mitzvot, life is boring. You're allowed now to indulge in a second pair of tefillin. You can now be careful. You have to really dig into what does it mean to be a Yirat Shamayim in the terminology of Maran. Don't think like, I want to be a Yirat Shamayim, so you want to be a Yirat Shamayim doesn't mean you are a Yirat Shamayim. Those are 2 different categories. Chachamim are full of stories of people who were pretending. They were not pretending. Like today, they do all kinds of things. People think they're extra pious. They do this, they do that. And really the basic halachot of decency they don't keep. I have stories in Morocco and Europe. They would go and rebuke these people in public. Rabbi Yosef Masas once saw somebody come to the Beit Knesset all wrapped up in a talit like he was some baba. He came in there Hey, this guy doesn't even know how to read. He ripped his talit off. I was like, you can't sit in the Beit HaKnesset like that. You have to accept your place, and your place is that you're not a Yirat Shamayim, that's all. The Rabbi Shalom Asas writes when he was a young man, he was reading and he said, I also want to wear 2 pairs of tefillin. So he bought a second pair of tefillin, he would wear it every day in the Beit HaKnesset. And then he said he realized, I live in Miknas. I'm in a synagogue full of Torah scholars. And nobody wears 2 pairs of tefillin except for me, the young kid in the block. He said, what does it mean when I'm in a synagogue full of Torah scholars? And they clearly don't think they reached this place where they have to wear 2 pairs of they haven't run out of mitzvot to do. And I, this young guy, I think, I'm going to show off how holy I am. And he immediately stopped wearing 2 pairs of tefillin. Later in life, could be that change. But in his early years, you have to know where you are. Our Chachamim tell us in Pirkei Avot that one of the ways in which to acquire Torah wisdom, hamakir et. No, Tomer, you're my Pirkei Avot expert. Hamakir et mikomo. I think it's the 6th chapter Pirkei Avot. One of the ways in which to acquire wisdom is to know your place. To know your place. I have a shiur somewhere. Judaism is not a democracy. There's a world in which you can pick and choose. It's some kind of smorgasbord of I'll do a little of this, I'll do a little bit of that. Judaism requires order, consistency. I know who I am. I am not there yet. I know who I am. This is something that I should be doing already. I've reached this place. I've graduated to a place where I should be doing this already. Last year I wasn't there. This year I am. Every Yom Kippur you should reevaluate. If not every day, but at least on Yom Kippur. Where am I this year? So what did I accomplish last year? How much have I grown? What am I doing this year? What's in my 10-year plan? People do this with their money all the time. They plan what they can do. They should. If they do, it's a different story. Look who's talking. But you say, you plan for the future. I want to make sure that by this year I've accomplished these milestones. Good. The same thing with Judaism. But don't expect that now you just graduated college, now you already have to buy, not a first house, you want to buy your second house to rent out to tenants. You don't even get to a place yet where you can pay rent on a house. What are you busy looking for? Every person has to know your place. And when you know your place and you grow within your means, then you'll live a healthy Jewish life. So we're going to deal with this opinion about Yirat Shamayim tonight and tomorrow. But don't get stuck on it. Don't feel like, hey, if I'm not Yirat Shamayim, then that's not going to count. Now the little print in the Shulchan Aruch is always the Rama. In your book it's a Rashi script. Rama writes the following. So this is the Ashkenazi commentary on the Shulchan Aruch. וכל זה לא מיירה אלא בדיעית לאחר אפיית תואר לחם. This second opinion of Rabbeinu Tam, that you say Hamotzi on dough that was fried or boiled, is only if it still looks like bread. אבל אילת בתואר לחם, but if it doesn't look like bread, כגון like lakshin, שקוראים vrumzlech. I don't think your book has a vav. Yeah, it does have a vrumzlech. Rabbanit, you know that word? No. Okay, it's, I know lakshin. Lakshin means noodles.
Garen in Yiddish means worms, so I don't think that.
Yeah, maybe like worm noodles,
I hope not.
So someone rebranded them in America. They called them angel hair spaghetti, right? Okay, but they used to call them worm spaghetti. Okay, so this was lakshin, but in Hebrew, there's an old Yiddish phrase that's still used in Hebrew, like "Al timkor li lakshin." Don't sell me spaghetti. Like don't sell me a fake story. It's got to be legit. Certainly, you don't wash your hands and say hamotzi over a bowl of spaghetti or pasta. The dough is thick. You boil it in water. But nobody would tell you that you recite Hamotzi lechem min haaretz on a bowl of pasta. Dilo mikre lechem, because it's not called bread. The Italians may beg to differ. This may be their whole food. But really, it's not. In the Gemara says there are 5 grains. Wheat, barley, so on and so forth. And there's a Chacham, Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, he says that rice is one of the 5 grains. And I think, Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri must have been Sephardic, because it could be that in his house, rice was the staple food of the family. But you go somewhere else, I think my wife, when we got married, said they ate rice in their house like once a year they had rice. It was when they ran out of something else. They made rice, like Uncle Ben's instant rice, I don't know what it was. Probably over there it was like Uncle Moshe's instant rice, and they put it in the microwave for 2 minutes, and that's rice. Sephardic grandmothers around the world are having heart attacks hearing this story. But that was, see, So maybe for some people it's a staple food. Nonetheless, pasta is not bread. Aval pashtida ukreplach. But pashtida, and I believe that the Rama here is using pashtida slightly differently than the way we use pashtida. Yeah, so in Hebrew we say pashtida. It's a Sephardic word, if I'm not mistaken. What are kreplach? Tell me kreplach. Dumplings. Yeah, they're Ashkenazi dough pockets stuffed with meat mostly. When's the custom to eat kreplach in the Ashkenazi community? Simchat Torah. What else? Rabbanit, where else? Purim.
Erev Yom Kippur,
Erev Yom
Simchat Torah, Hoshana Rabbah, and Purim.
Oh, very good. Those are the times which Ashkenazi Jews have a custom to eat kreplach. So imagine you go to your favorite Chinese restaurant and they give you, what do they call those? Wontons? That's a kreplach. All of these things, mikrei to'ar lechem, they're called bread. A dumpling looks like bread?
It's made out from rice.
No, so forget. We're talking about flour and water. What is a dumpling? It looks like bread? Kreplach looks like bread?
No.
Here, and I don't have any proof for what I'm telling you right now, aside from the kreplach that I see Ashkenazi Jews eat, doesn't look like bread. So it must mean that the kreplach that the Rama is talking about, it's not the same food that the Ashkenazi Jews are eating today and calling kreplach. That's normal. Sometimes, food is called one thing. I'll give you an example. The word madbucha and the word shakshuka, people normally think madbucha has some kind of tomato sauce and shakshuka has eggs added to the tomato sauce. But in my grandmother's home, what you call madbucha, she called shakshuka. Am I right? Maybe the other way around.
You're right.
I'm right. I mean, different words are used in different places, and they mean slightly different things depending on where you are and what you're calling them. But he's talking about some kind of stuffed food that looks like bread. And you should not eat them unless you've recited Hamotzi on another bread first. אלא שמטוגן בהן. אבל אם נילוש בהן, כבר נדבר דנו אצל פת הבא בכיסנים. Says the Rama, all this is talking about dough, which you're frying or boiling in other liquids. But if those liquids, like juice or other types of sweetening foods, ingredients are added to the food, to the dough, then that's already in the category of pata ba b'kisnin, which we mentioned earlier this year. We discussed all about bread that's baked with apple juice or such other things. That already has an entirely different halacha category. Let me summarize for you. Maran says the following. If you take dough that is the type of dough you can make bread out of, and you boil it in water, or you fry it inside of oil, or you cook it in any other liquid. So I can't think of another example, but those are the two examples. Even if it looks like bread, meaning it comes out looking like bread, it doesn't make a difference. The blessing on that is not Hamotzi lechem min haaretz, because it's not bread. He then writes, V'yesh cholkin, there are those who disagree. That's Rabbeinu Tam. That in such a case, we don't go based on the final product, the way that you cook the food, but rather the dough. The consistency of the dough is what determines if something is bread or it's not bread. If it's pancake batter, then it's not bread. But if it's dough, I don't care if you fry it or you boil it, but it's still bread. And this opinion, which Maran does not accept as law, says that you would have to recite Hamotzi on dough, thick dough, that you boil or fry. And then Maran kind of leaves us off hanging at the end, and Maran says, well, if you can, and you are a God-fearing individual, you're Yirat Shamayim, then you should try to fulfill both opinions and only eat this food in the middle of a meal. I have a brother-in-law, should live and be well, I won't mention his name. He's in the halacha category of Yirat Shamayim. So he's the individual, like I told you before, he's run out of mitzvot to fulfill. And I'm not exaggerating. He's not just a nice guy. He's not like a brother-in-law I love. He's a real Talmid Chacham. Meaning the kind of person that when I have questions in halacha that I want to fight out with somebody, he's the only person that I can call, that I can have these kind of conversations with. You're going to ask him now, if you would call him now, you'd wake him up in his bed, probably he's awake already, wakes up at midnight to start studying Torah. You call him now, and you say, Rabbi so-and-so, I'm in section 168 of Shulchan Aruch, halacha 13. What is the Maran right and who argues with him? And he'll tell you exactly what Maran writes and who argued with him. And then why? And then he'll define for you Yirat Shamayim based on 12 other sources that use the same word. So he has all kinds of foods that when I come to his house, he doesn't eat them unless he's in the middle of a meal where they have bread, because he's in this category of people who doesn't know which bracha to make on something. Rama adds in an important note. The Rama says that which the second opinion says you make a hamotzi on such fried or boiled foods, it's only if they look like bread. But if they don't look like bread, what's his example of a dough that's boiled that doesn't look like bread? Think about worms. Spaghetti, pasta, those are foods that they don't become now hamotzi lechem min haaretz. It's an interesting thing. What sets apart two things that are made out of the same dough? One is cooked one way, one is cooked a different way. Why is one a hamotzi and one is a mezonot? Why are those things different? And that's really what we're going to spend tonight and tomorrow about. I want just to start with you one sentence or two, and then we'll keep the rest for tomorrow night because it's already getting late over here. But let me just do with you what it says at the bottom of the page, 467. Let's do one sentence. This is what we say we started tonight, and we'll keep the rest for tomorrow. Birkat ha'isa mevushelet u'metugenet. The blessing on dough that is fried or baked or cooked. Under the two lines on page 467. Isa sheblilata racha shebishla b'mayim or tigna b'shemen b'lo afia klal. Dough which has a soft consistency that you boil or you fry without baking it at all. Mevarech aleha mezonot v'al-michya. So it's obvious that something like a pancake, aside from the fact that it's sweet. So let's pretend you made unsweet ones. You're frying it in oil or whatever else you're doing. That those would be a mezonot. Isa sheblilata ava, but dough which has a thick consistency. Shebishla b'mayim or tigna b'shemen, which you boiled in water, fried in oil. Mikar hadin mevarech aleha mezonot v'al-michya. The basic halacha is that you recite a mezonot and an al-hamichya. ואפילו יש עליה צורת פת, even if it looks like bread. ויש בחתיכות שהתבשלו שיעור כזית בכל אחד. And even if they're big pieces, they're the size of an olive or more. ואפילו אם בשעה שלה שתעיסה חשב להפותה בתנור ואחר כך נמלח בדעתו ובשלה. He's adding in a extra note. Even if you were intending to make this into bread, this was your leftover challah dough. You just didn't get a chance to put it in the oven. And you take your challah dough and you deep fry it. And even if you made part of this dough already into bread, and now this is just the leftovers. The basic halacha is that you recite a mezonot and an al-hamichya on this, because the halacha is determined not by the consistency of the dough, but the halacha is determined by the final product. I'll end off here for tonight. God willing, we'll capture this tomorrow. I want maybe just to say, our Chachamim say that akol holech achar chatima, that everything in life is really, it's judged based on how you end up. Now the Chachamim have another saying that everything depends on how you begin. So you know what they say, first impressions are very important. So the Chachamim have two different ideas. Some say first impressions are truly important. Some say that final impressions are very important. You can have a great phone call, and the last sentence of your phone call you say something ridiculous and it ruined everything good. There are people, you're in relationships like that, and you're friends with them for years and years and years, and something happened, you forgot to call them, you forgot to do something, you forgot to answer, whatever it was that happened. I'm just telling you real life examples of mine. You forgot something, it was, you walked in the bed of Knesset, you didn't say Shabbat Shalom, you thought somebody was praying, they weren't praying, they were just looking into the book, and you didn't say it, and they'll never talk to you again, because you didn't say Shabbat Shalom, you walked by me. Now with COVID, you don't really have these problems. You don't see anybody, and if you see them, you definitely don't talk to them. So this is one of those, Baruch Hashem, we've gone back to like 1,000 years of social therapy we're going to need after this. But nonetheless, this example will one day be relevant to our great-grandchildren who will hear this recording, hopefully. And we have to say that Maran is essentially telling you the halacha is, it doesn't make a difference where you started. What makes a difference is where you are right now. Now are you bread? How are you cooked? How are you baked? Where are you today? What is your final state? People are very stuck in their whole life. They're stuck. They're stuck on where I was. They're stuck on... There's some of you who are in the shiur tonight. It's your first time here with us tonight. And I'm sure some of you are saying, okay, so we went from like Rambam, Second Temple, prophecies. Now we're talking about dough that's being deep fried or boiled in water and halachot. And there's a German rabbi who argues and a Polish rabbi is involved and kremslach and wurmslach. And you're saying, I don't have any background that makes me qualified or even interested in studying any of this stuff right now. I'm telling you that's the whole point of tonight's halacha. Tonight's halacha is telling you it doesn't make a difference what kind of dough you are. What makes a difference is what you're going to do with that dough. Are you going to cook that dough? Are you going to bake that dough? Are you going to fry that dough? What are you going to become? That's going to determine which blessing we recite on you, which blessing you bring into your life. So I'm giving you chizuk. I'm giving you some strength and some support. That for all of you who are sitting here wondering, maybe, I don't know, but stop thinking about yesterday and start thinking about where you want to go. And decide, maybe Yirat Shamayim, I'm not yet. I didn't run out of mitzvot. But I'm at a place where I want to learn more, and I'm willing to challenge myself to learn things that maybe previously I would have never taken a chance to learn. And B'ezrat Hashem, we'll be doing that together here tomorrow.